Building State Capacity and Productivity Center, or BSCP logo. The BSCP Center presents Meeting the ESSA Financial Transparency Reporting Requirement, Per Pupil Expenditures, Technical Challenges, and Historical Perspective. A presentation recorded on February 9, 2017, in Washington, D.C. Image of the speaker, Shara Krivarik.
Shara Krivarik of the Federal Education Group explains the big picture equity and technical concerns meeting the financial transparency requirement and provides some examples of prior Department of Education accounting requirements.
The main concerns we're hearing, other than the legal chaos, which we can spend the whole panel talking about, but the main sort of substantive concerns we're hearing are around capacity and around interpretation. So on capacity, it's ranging everything from the technical capacity, and that means local accounting systems to even generate the right levels of coding and to navigate the fact that sometimes they run off of county accounting systems, and they have to respect the coding of those counting systems, and it might not reflect, and having to run, backup Excel spreadsheets and multiple. So there's sort of a system capacity, and then there are concerns around staff capacity, because to properly code things down to function, object, school level, and then for places that have sort of program codes to get this rich data, it's going to require bodies to be able to do that, and that's a challenge for a lot of smaller places. But also there's a judgmental aspect to this. How you code a cost can vary considerably from district to district for very important reasons. And, just give you a quick example. A bunch of years ago, the General Accountability Office was trying to get a handle on how much Title I money is spent on administration. And GAO went in and they realized they couldn't actually answer the question because districts across the country coded costs differently. So think about the professional development you give to a Title I director. A Title I director is an administrative position in most districts, so there were districts that would automatically code professional development to admin. Then you had places that were looking at the content of the professional development. If it was, for example, professional development for Title I staff around school improvement, they would code that as an instructional cost. So it's just, it requires a lot of judgment, and what we have found in our practice is the accounting rules end up driving instructional behaviors, sometimes in ways we don't want. And this is where you get into the interpretive part. So, I'll give you an example that I know is near and dear to your heart from research you've done. There has been a model in Title I for more than 2 decades that lets high poverty schools have more flexibility to spend federal dollars on whole school improvement, so comprehensive school improvement initiatives. And that's the school-wide model. And the theory is that when you hit a certain level of poverty, the needs of the school are so great, you can't just isolate individual kids and give them targeted supports. You have to make some structural changes. Maybe you have to improve all of your staff, or you have to fix your curriculum, or you need to reorient your school day. So there's this model. It has not been used effectively in large part because no one's been able to figure out the accounting. When you are spending title dollars on whole school improvements, how do you count that if you're trying to coordinate funds across sources? So this is a place where the accounting has gotten in the way of a school improvement model. You'll see the same thing. So people are worried about, hey, I have staff that I float around my district based on school need. Think about a speech therapist where you don't know where the IEPs are going to play out from year to year, so you have a staff member that's a speech therapist that's going to go from school to school based on student need. Or you might have reading interventionists that float from school to school. Maybe you have somebody that's at a unique phase in a response to intervention, and so they're going to need a reading interventionist really in depth with them for several months, and then they sort of stabilize it and you need to go somewhere else and you're not going to be able to predict that. I think people are worried about if I really have to sort of attribute that stuff down to the school level so that the community can get a good sense of the range of supports going to that school, am I going to artificially then lock that person in and say, I can't trace you as you're moving from school to school, so I'm going to say you have to work in these 4 schools on a 0.25 basis. And so people are worried that the accounting is going to end up driving it. On the interpretation side, I think financial data is critically important, and it's going to give, as we had this morning, lots of insight. But it is not going to be an exclusive equity indicator, because there are so many things that go on with that. So on the one hand, you may have variations from school to school for reasons that make perfect sense. You might be purposely taking your highest incidence special ed students, putting them into your highest performing schools because you want to do an inclusion model, and that school can absorb those students without all of the extra flux, and that's why you're spending more in that school. So that won't tell you, necessarily if something's being driven by inequity. You might have the other way around. School spending might look consistent across schools, but in your schools that serve minority populations and low-income populations, they're not having access to rigorous coursework, and that's not going to come up in the financial data.
This podcast is in the public domain. While permission to reprint is not necessary, links to the podcast should be cited as BSCP Center Producer, 2017, February 9. Meeting the ESSA Financial Transparency Reporting Requirement for Pupil Expenditures, Technical Challenges, and Historical Perspective. Podcast. Retrieved from http://bscpcenter.org. This podcast can be viewed on www.bscpcenter.org. The podcast is prepared by the BSCP Center under Award Number S283B120042 for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education of the U.S. Department of Education, and is administered by Advance Research Incorporated. The content of the podcast does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education or the U.S. Department of Education, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. The BSCP logo.